guys. All right, we're going to open in prayer with a gentleman who's become a good friend. We met him through Mike Sawyer, and he's a pastor and evangelist and a real dynamic guy. He spoke to us about a month or so ago. We didn't get it recorded, but it was just excellent. And I've asked him to open us and close us today in prayer. So you would welcome Hans Leon, and if you have any things you want to say, and then open some prayer.
Let's bow our heads. Father, we just come to you in the name of Jesus. And Lord, we just give you thanks that you are doing a sovereign work in our day and among us. And I just pray, Lord, that as we meet today, Lord, that we would just surrender this time and our minds and hearts to you and your instructions for us. And Father God, I just thank you that we as servants and vessels would be poured out for your purposes. And I just give you thanks for OCPAC and what you're doing through it. And we just say, your will be done, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Attention to colors. Hand salute. You're on the right there. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're still waiting to hear from Kevin Stead. He had agreed to do a video conference with us today at noon. And then after the election, actually I got a text from one of his staffers at 2 o'clock this morning. I was asleep at the time, but I opened it this morning. And he just thanked me for congratulating him. And then I got a text at 8 saying that he was going to be on the road at noon. So I said, well, hey, he can just call my cell phone, and he can talk through my cell phone. So we're still waiting to get that confirmed. But when I found that out, I thought, well, I'm going to call Dr. Everett Piper, who I think we all love and appreciate. And as it turns out, as I talked to Everett this morning, he's all over this election and what it's done and what the teachers' unions accomplished. And not just the teachers' unions, but as Charlie Meadows pointed out to me this morning, the unions have been more organized and unified than ever as a group. And these are mainly unions of public employees, cities, counties, state employees, unified to get certain people elected. And well, I'm not going to read through you guys. You guys have access to the election results, but obviously Joy Hoffmeister and Leslie Osborne were two prime candidates that were elected because of this effort of the unions. And we lost, on the state level, 6 out of 7 conservative state House members, legislators, who lost because of the unions. You know, we won some good races, but we lost some. We're basically, I think we won, my tabulation on my results, I think we won 9 and lost 15. That is not good, called a win in a football game, I know. And so we have a lot of work to do. So I've asked Dr. Piper to address that with us a little bit this morning. And Ponce, are you able to call him? This may sound noisy at first, because I think the phone has to ring, am I right?
Yeah.
So, are you going to blast out their ears?
Probably not. But
I think you all know Dr. Everett Piper is president of Oklahoma Wesleyan, and he's taken that university up from ashes of just a dismal state to a vibrant, prosperous, and really a model, maybe the model Christian university anywhere in the world. So,
we doing okay?
yes, we are.
yeah, can you hear me talk?
Yeah, can you hear Bob?
I can hear pretty fine as long as you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, and so I've introduced you. They know that you're the president of Oklahoma Baptist University. Excuse me, did I get that? I'm sorry. No, I didn't get that. I was just teasing with you there. So they know you're a president of Oklahoma Wesleyan in Bartlesville, and have some things to say about the dominance of the teachers union in this election and what it's done to our Christian education. So take the time you want there.
Well, first of all, I know you want me to greet, and I will, and I'm honored that you all asked me to join you this morning, and I know you have a keynote speaker, so I'm going to honor all that. And by the way, Bob, I know that because you're a Baptist, it was predestined that you make that mistake. You could make
Well, actually, theologically, I'm more Presbyterian, but we do hang out with Baptists. And
Well, you didn't do anything about it either way, so.
Exactly.
All right, as president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, I had to deal with teacher unions myself, and I think what you saw last night was the fact that you see some progressives disguise themselves as Republicans in the primary to unseat conservative Republicans. So essentially what we have right now is we have a handful of conservative Republicans that we all support and believe in. The left, the progressives, the teacher unions decided to have some people switch parties, claim to be Republican when they're really not, claim to be somewhat conservative when they have no desire to be so. And they ran in as stealth candidates, and they basically defeated the true conservative. I think there are two reasons for that. One is, and I may be offending some of you, I'm sorry, the Republican Party in Oklahoma has abandoned its cause. By and large, the Republican Party in Oklahoma has ceased to be conservative, and we've seen that from the governor's office on down. And as I said on the Pat Campbell show a number of times, that I hope I'm wrong, that I see a blue wave across even Oklahoma, the rest of red states, because we no longer have faith that Republicans are Republicans. So what difference does it make if we're going to elect people that claim to be conservative and the government as if they're not? We've lost faith in them, and therefore you're going to see a lot of the electorate start shifting to the middle, if not to the left. And I think what we saw last night is indeed that as a fact. When somebody stands for nothing, they're going to lead no one anywhere. In other words, if you're an enemy to no one and a friend to all, then you're leading no one at any time. And what we've seen right now is this capitulation and compromise is going to result in Republicans losing. That's number one. Number two, the teachers union is very powerful, very effective. I challenged the teachers union in Bartlesville because they claimed that because I was going on the Dr. Carlson show and challenging our educational establishment for teaching lecturing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. We shouldn't now be surprised to see lecturers, i.e. Harvey Weinstein and whatnot, acting out their lecturing that they've been taught in the public schools for the last several decades. We should be surprised with their behavior. Well, when I said that, the teachers union in Bartlesville came unglued that I would dare to challenge their challenge it at all in terms of the morality or lack thereof that they teach in the schools. I think the solution, guys, is to get a spine and to confront this stuff with courage and clarity. When the teachers union challenged me, I just pushed back and I said, wait a second. Look at Jay, Oklahoma. Look at Edmond, Oklahoma. Look at Cherry Creek, Colorado. Look at Fox Ridge, Colorado. And I cited example after example after example where the teachers' unions have failed us by bringing sexual amorality in the classroom rather than sexual responsibility and moral instruction. And I said, if you want to dispute those facts, go ahead, bring it on. And when I got firm with them and said, let's debate this factually, they actually kind of backed away. But until you get a spine, you get some courage, you get some clarity, and be conservative and know why, I think we lose. And I think by and large that's what happened last night. But I'll be quiet.
Great. Well, that was fantastic. Does anybody have a quick question for Everett while he's on the phone? No, that's exactly, I like it when somebody talks about backbone because it's exactly what's missing in our culture from the church on down. And I was very encouraged by the announcement that the pastor, what I consider a large, is that a mega church?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
25,000.
Pastor willing to stand up and say, debunk the concept of gay marriage. And that's something that many of our large churches just don't want to do. And so we need a backbone, as Dr. Piper has said. So Everett, you're welcome to join our meeting and stay there, or you can just shut the phone. How does this work, Monses?
He could just hang up his phone.
Yeah, so as long as you want to be there, fine, and if you want to stay with us, you're welcome to, but I'm going to introduce our next speaker.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we all have fond memories, when people talk about a presidential candidate for the Republican Party, the first guy that comes to mind is Ronald Reagan. We'd all like another Reagan, and I'd like another Reagan. And we think of Reagan, we think of Reaganomics. And what some of us don't know is the foundation of Reaganomics came from a guy by the name of Arthur Laffer. And he developed something that he drew on a napkin one day that was called the Laffer curve, which says if you don't tax anything, the government gets no money. And if you tax people at 100%, you probably still get no money. And somewhere in that curve, you max out. That sounds like something we might have talked about in math class one day, or physics or something. And so he brought this as an economic principle. We just don't know if the curve is in the middle or kind of toward the left or right. And those are things debated. But that's Arthur Laffer, a major economist, and he has worked with other economists, and one in particular got together with our speaker today, Jonathan Small, and they I think it was 8 years ago, was it, that you guys put together Economics 101, addressing questions that you and I would think that any guy with common sense might know, and that's the degree to which taxation more or less impacts the motivation of people, no matter what state of the union they live in, whether they live in beautiful Colorado or sunny California or in cold Montana, that seems to impact our motivation. So it was called Economics 101, and because of his involvement with these, Mr. Laffer and other economists nationally, Jonathan Small has developed some notoriety himself nationally and has received notes in the Wall Street Journal and other major newspapers. And so, but today we've asked him to talk about something that, because of what happened yesterday, very appropriate topic, and that is teachers' unions. And of course, OCPA is big on government choice, or educational choice. And we would like to be able to choose the kind of car we'd like to drive, and the kind of television set we'd like to watch, and the kind of football games we'd like to watch or not. And so we don't know why we're forced to have government schools as our only option for the tax money we pay for that. So that's something that OCPA is working on, and Jonathan Small is here to talk to us specifically about teachers' unions. And I think, Jonathan, do you have handouts, or does that come later?
Yes, I'll hand it out later.
Come later on. So if you would welcome the president of OCPA. You can grab that, or
Thank you, Bob. Could you, that intro that you just gave me, could you give that to my wife and my dad, please? So there's probably some bad memories they have of some of my actions, but they would appreciate that. So Bob forgot to mention, did a really good job of making another thing I'm known as sound really exciting. So I'm a CPA, which stands for, we joke, it means that you can't pass the test again, CPA. And then also known as a nerd. So you guys have had great food here at Wilshire Gun Club, and now you've got to hear a numbers guy talk about nerdy numbers. So this is only going to be beneficial if you interrupt me like a union president would when I debate them, and ask me all kinds of questions. And I'm going to start a stopwatch so that way I make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. So I want to say a couple of things, and then I'm going to go into policy. So first of all, I think this group is dedicated to trying to find the truth about what's going on. And so I think those of us who have a passion for truth, we sometimes are very aware of what's not going well first. But I think we also have to be very aware of what is going well. And how do I know something's going well? And that's because monitoring social media activity yesterday, the teachers' unions were livid. They were livid because the two highest statewide offices last night were won by people who are unabashed fiscal conservatives who espouse the traditional principles of free markets, limited government, individual initiative, and personal responsibility. And they won despite hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spending against them. And so that only happens because of people like you in this room sharing the truth. So that's one thing I want us to be aware of, is that the status quo in Oklahoma is not happy with the results. They would gladly trade some House seats that they won and have two fiscally liberal standard bearers running against each other in the general. So you guys should pat yourselves on the back for that. I also want to say, it's something that we don't want to hear, but long has been, it's the problem that the church has had as well. But if you look at how the opposite side generally operates, they're much better at relationship. And one of the things that we're all going to have to get a lot better on is when lawmakers who are voting the right way vote the right way, both they must be and their allies must be heavy advocates in their district for why they're voting the right way. There's, like we said, there's some great victories, some surprises that where conservatives won, but there's also some unforced errors that cause conservatives to lose. And so there's a lot of opportunity. Again, if fiscal liberalism was what Oklahomans wanted, and a majority of them wanted, you would not have seen the outcomes that you saw in the two most prominent statewide races last night. Even looking at the congressional race, regardless of one's thoughts about who won, the fact of the matter is a small business owner who has not been involved in politics won the congressional race. So the outsider momentum that's happening is much better for our side than it is for their side, because those people are coming from common sense, balancing budgets, and writing paychecks, as opposed to spending their time taking by force of threat of a gun tax dollars out of people's pockets. So I want to get started about something. So I wanted to hand these out afterwards. So I want to talk about politicized schools threatening education, and then want to move into some reforms, and then answer some questions. And then I also wanted to leave you a document so that you can begin sharing with your friends about how much tax revenue has been raised in the last 4 years in the second term of the current governor. It's no coincidence that a governor that ran on going to go line by line and rebuked Brad Henry for raising taxes in a recession. It's no coincidence that that governor who ran on going to finally control the good old boy Democrat system that was created, didn't do that, and then went 180 degrees the entire second term. It's no coincidence that that governor has a 74% disapproval rating. No one should be surprised by that. So there's some things that I think we have some great opportunity to educate people on as things move forward. So an example of politicized schools. How many of you have heard of the city of Bixby? Beautiful suburb in the Tulsa area. Did you know that the sort of president, executive director, if you will, of the Bixby Public Schools posted prior to the June primary that they were going to host at the school a call bank for what they deemed a strategic get out the vote list. One of our folks and several others became alarmed about the fact that public school systems, Bixby Public Schools does get some of your state taxpayer dollars if you were not aware, is being used to recruit and turn out voters who would vote for a specific candidate. As you can imagine, once OCPA and others began to raise the specter of what was going on, it's funny, I gave this similar talk to the High Noon Club, and it was fascinating. So I talked about how the unions, so did you guys know that any teacher that's participating in the Oklahoma Education Association, the teachers union, state teachers union in Oklahoma, did you know that 40% of their dues goes to the National Education Association, who spends their money trying to undermine the current president of the United States, trying to undermine the current senators that you elect, trying to undermine congressmen that you elect, and they take those dollars, they take 40% of the dues that they take from teachers. Here's what's a fascinating stat. If anybody should be thrown out of office, it should be unions. You know why they should be? Because from 1992 to 2014, this is their numbers, this isn't OCPA's numbers, the number of teachers that were added in from a staffing standpoint in education was right at about 10%. The number of students that grew in our school system was 16%, but the number of non-teaching staff was 38%. If the growth of non-teaching staff in Oklahoma from 1992 roughly to 2015 had just been its growth the previous 10 years, that would have freed up an additional $332 million that it could have been given in teacher pay raises. So if anybody is failing teachers and not representing them well, it's actually the unions who allow non-teaching positions to be members of the union to give them more dues. So you have to understand the math, the way the financial math works for unions. Adding another teacher is the only way that they make more money, or adding another non-teaching staff. When a teacher gets a raise, the OEA isn't necessarily going to make any more money, because for the most part they have a flat dues system. So whether I'm an excelling math teacher that gets paid $80,000 a year, or I'm a pre-K teacher that's just starting out, fresh out of college, making $35,000 a year, often their dues are the same. So I'd encourage you to check out that article. They were directly involved. What's fascinating is the BEA said that the Bixby Education Association, affiliate of the, and so anyway, if they try to tell you they're not connected to the NEA, all you have to do is look at their agreement that they signed with the school district, where they specifically mentioned that the BEA is an affiliate and a subsidiary of both the OEA, the Oklahoma Education Association, and the NEA, National Education Association. So in all of their contracts that they're signing with school districts, they're openly expressing that they are members of the National Education Association. So how do we fix the problem? You heard it talked about from Dr. Piper about the involvement of unions in various races. So we've proposed a number of reforms. Did you know that in Oklahoma, in many of the school districts that exist today, the current teachers union has been the sole representative for teachers for more than a generation? There are teachers who went into the teaching workforce 30 plus years ago and retired from the teaching workforce, and they never got to vote on whether or not they wanted a union in their district, and they for sure never got to vote on whether or not they wanted a union to exist who funnels 40% of their money out of the state of Oklahoma to help get Hillary Clinton elected. What OCPA says is that it's now clear that unions in Oklahoma have government power. When Oklahoma has a no-strike law for both state employees and teachers, and unions can tell school boards to close for 2 weeks, they're de facto government officials. So what's happened in a number of states where it's more aware, Oklahomans are really nice. If you go to other states where it's more purple and where the stakes are even higher, they have a real understanding of who's opposed to who. So one of the reforms that they passed is the idea of teacher recertification. And that says that every union in every district has to stand for election, just like politicians do, every 4 years. We feel like that teachers ought to have a right to decide whether or not they want a far left liberal union representing them, or they want a more conservative union that represents them, that would support both the rights of teachers and students. As you can imagine, that was the number one bill that was targeted in opposition by the teachers union at the Capitol last year while they were on strike, was our bill to allow teachers, their members, the chance to vote on whether or not that union should represent them or another union should have the opportunity to represent them. Another problem, funneling your money, your taxpayer money, to teachers to your political enemies. In the state of Oklahoma, in 2015, lawmakers, in a courageous effort, passed what is known as paycheck protection. What that law says is that, hey, it's fine for unions to exist, just like it's fine for my church to exist. But just like the school district doesn't pass my tithe on to my church, we are not going to reach into a teacher's paycheck before we give it to them to serve as the bagman and pass on money to the union. If a union is an important entity for a teacher to be involved in, then that teacher will voluntarily give to that union, just like we all do to, probably in this room, there are probably dozens of nonprofits and other organizations that are represented in the individual financial decisions that all of our families are making. That concept is known as paycheck protection. It was passed in 2011. Unfortunately, politicians who are in a position to defend that law in court have not, and the unions are using one word as a technicality to try to prevent school districts from enforcing that law. So we were recommending that the next legislature level the playing field between the political unions who are going after the people that you support, and just merely say we're going to treat a union that bargains against taxpayers in the state of Oklahoma just like we treat churches, which is if you want to voluntarily give to a church, you voluntarily give to a church. If you want to voluntarily give to a union, you do that on your own. But don't make taxpayers serve as the administrative bagman to funnel 40% of the money straight off the top from the amount of dues that are coming from a teacher to serve national liberal interests like the NEA. For those of you that worry about polls, this room normally doesn't worry about that. You guys normally just worry about doing the right thing. But when you ask people, should teachers and school employees be allowed to vote on the unions that represent them, 67% of Oklahomans agree that they should. Only 13% think that they shouldn't. 20% had no opinion. Here's what's fascinating. Even more Democrats agree than even Republicans. 70% of Democrats think that teachers should have a right to get to vote on the unions that represent them. Only 11% of Democrats disagree, and 19% have no opinion. And then, as far as Oklahoma Republicans, 67% think that teachers should have a right to vote on the unions that are representing them. And then 14% of Republicans disagree. So there's bipartisan support for this. There's even support in the district of the House lawmaker who killed this legislation a couple of years ago, and so there's great opportunity for that. I want to call your attention to two items, and then I want to take questions. I think I've done pretty good so far. I haven't seen anybody nodding off, and I'm right at 15 minutes. So you're going to get, there's an article called Hysteria and Hyperbole Surround Teacher Certifications. I am sure you are like me and you are getting inundated with the newspapers telling you about the next one or two alternative certifications that were approved by the school board. You can't help but miss it if you're checking the news online or you're checking it in the front of the newspaper. So it occurred to OCPA, why don't we see what are the percentage of emergency certifications that are being issued by other states? Now you remember the teachers union is constantly, and administrators, they're constantly comparing Oklahoma pay to the pay of teachers in Texas, and they're constantly comparing spending in education to total spending in Texas. So keep that in mind. Remember, they love Texas, except as it relates to school hours, because Texas actually has a longer school day than Oklahoma, but I digress. But keep in mind, they love Texas on the spending side. So we just had this radical idea of, hey, why don't we check and see what percent of certifications, alternative certifications or emergency certifications are happening in other states. So Oklahoma, of the total amount of the available workforce as it relates to education and teachers, the total amount of emergency certifications is 2.76%. Now, let me tell you something about government. I love government and what they do with wording. So, did you know that, let's say you teach 7th grade math. You get a certification for teaching 7th grade math. And let's say your school teacher loses a teacher who teaches 6th grade math to Texas because Texas was paying better. That teacher who teaches 7th grade math has to go get a certification to teach 6th grade math. Did you hear that?
In Texas?
No, in Oklahoma. So if you can teach 7th grade math, you need a certification to teach 6th grade math. So in a number of these numbers about alternative certifications, they are literally certifications to teachers who are already teaching the similar subject just in a different grade. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But anyway, so right now in Oklahoma, and this is actually not that wild of a number. If you look at the accounting field where I'm from, often working at an accounting firm are a number of people who aren't CPAs. They're accountants or they have some training, but they haven't passed the CPA exam. 2.76%. When you see the liberal media write in the newspaper, they write about emergency certifications like of the 42,000 teachers, only 2,000 of them are actually certified. And that we have $40,000 or 40,000